My name is Carol, and I'm 22 years old. I just graduated from college, and I've got a story to tell you about my house, well, technically, my mother's house. Or it was, until she passed away from intestinal cancer 4 years ago and left it to me. Mom was always the planning type. Even before the cancer diagnosis, she made sure everything was in order. The house was hers free and clear, she'd bought it before she even met my dad, and thank God for that foresight. She made sure I knew about the will, too. This way you'll always have a home, she told me, her voice steady, despite everything she was going through. Things weren't always this complicated. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before Dad decided to leave us for another woman. I was 9 when he packed his bags. No drama, no fighting over custody or property, he just left. The only thing he agreed to was paying for my college education. He set up a special account and transferred the entire sum for my future studies right away. I guess that was his version of child support. Dad started a new family pretty quickly. His wife Linda had their daughter shortly after, she's 10 years younger than me. I'd visit sometimes, staying at their rented house, but it never felt right. Linda would be busy with my half-sister, cooing over her latest accomplishment or fixing her hair. Dad was always working, claiming he needed to provide for his family. Funny how I wasn't really included in that category anymore. "Carol, would you like to join us for dinner?" Linda would ask, but her tone always suggested she hoped I'd decline. We kept things cordial though, exchanging birthday cards, holiday greetings, the occasional forced family dinner. It was all very proper and polite, in that uncomfortable way that makes your skin crawl. Mom made good money as a senior accountant, so when the cancer hit, she could focus entirely on treatment. I was 14 when we got the diagnosis. She quit her job immediately to focus on fighting the disease. For 4 years, we lived between hospital visits and treatment sessions. Mom never complained, not once. She just kept fighting, kept planning, kept making sure I would be okay. But cancer doesn't care about plans. I was 18 when she died, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college in another state. The grief hit me hard, I could barely function. That's when Dad surprised me by actually stepping up. He, Linda, and my half-sister moved in temporarily to help me cope with the loss. I was too numb to question it at the time, too grateful for any support I could get. "We'll help you through this," Dad said, putting his arm around my shoulders. Linda nodded along, trying to look sympathetic while my half-sister explored what was now my house. By the end of summer, I was faced with a dilemma. College was starting in a few weeks, and I had no idea what to do with Mom's house, my house now. I couldn't bear the thought of selling it, but leaving it empty for 4 years didn't seem smart either. That's when Dad came up with his proposal over breakfast one morning. "Carol," he said, pushing his coffee mug aside, "I've been thinking. What if we stayed here? We'd pay all the bills, maintain the place. You wouldn't have to worry about anything while you're at school." I looked at Linda, who was making pancakes at the stove. She turned around and smiled. "It would be good for all of us," she added. "Sophie's already enrolled in the local school, and the house would be well taken care of." It made sense. During the 2 months they'd been staying with me, things had been surprisingly okay. Linda had stopped being so distant, and Sophie, my half-sister, had actually started treating me like a real sister instead of some stranger who showed up occasionally. So I agreed. Looking back, it seemed like the perfect solution. I packed up Mom's personal things, keeping what I wanted and storing the rest in the attic. I left for college feeling confident about my decision. Over the next 4 years, I came home during holidays and summer breaks. Those visits were nice, actually. Linda would cook these big welcome home dinners. "I made your favorite lasagna," she'd say, as if she'd always known my favorites. Sophie would drag me to her room to show me her latest artwork or tell me about school drama. During Christmas breaks, we'd all decorate the tree together. Dad would lift Sophie to put the star on top, while Linda and I argued good-naturedly about whether tinsel was tacky or classic. We'd sit around drinking hot chocolate, And sometimes I could almost forget that this wasn't the family I started with. Summer visits were different, longer, more relaxed. Sophie and I would spend afternoons by the community pool, and I'd help her with her summer reading. Linda would invite me to her book club meetings, and we'd actually have fun dissecting whatever romance novel they'd chosen that month. "Your sister's so good with Sophie," I overheard Linda telling Dad one evening. "It's nice having her home." That made me feel warm inside, like maybe we really had become a proper family. I called regularly during semesters, weekly chats with Dad about my classes, catching up with Linda about house maintenance, "The roses you planted are blooming beautifully, Carol," and FaceTime sessions with Sophie, who kept me updated on her middle school adventures. Everything seemed perfect. We'd created this strange but functional family dynamic, built on the foundation of my mother's house. I never imagined it could all fall apart so quickly, but I guess that's the thing about houses. No matter how solid the foundation, you never know what's going on behind the walls. Finally, at 22, with my degree in hand and a job lined up back home, I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. I'd already accepted a position at Marshall & Brooks Financial in my hometown. They'd interviewed me via Zoom and offered me the job right away. Everything was falling into place perfectly. Or so I thought. The taxi dropped me off in front of my house on a sunny June afternoon. I stood there for a moment, taking in the familiar sight. Mom's rose bushes were in full bloom, though they looked different from how she used to maintain them. The lawn was neatly trimmed, and new curtains hung in the windows. Little changes that had happened while I was away at college. Wheeling my suitcases up the front walk, I reached for my keys with a smile, already imagining sleeping in my old room tonight. But when I tried to unlock the door, something was wrong. The key wouldn't turn. I tried again, thinking maybe I was just tired from the journey, but no, the key definitely didn't fit. "What the hell?" I muttered, trying the key again before finally giving up and knocking on the door, loudly, since it was the middle of the day and they might be watching TV. Linda opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise. She was wearing an apron and had flour on her hands, like she'd been baking. "Carol, what are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase inside, noticing Dad and Sophie in the living room, both looking equally startled by my appearance. Sophie was sprawled on the couch with her phone, while Dad sat in his favorite armchair, Mom's old armchair, actually, reading something on his tablet. "What do you mean? I live here," I said, looking around at what seemed like subtle changes to the living room decor. "Why were the locks changed?" Dad scratched his neck, that nervous habit he's had since forever. "Oh, that. Yeah, I changed them last month. For safety, you know. There were some break-ins in the neighborhood." "You could have told me," I said, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "Or sent me a new key. I mean, this is my house." "We weren't expecting you," Linda said carefully, her arms crossed over her chest. She'd wiped the flour off her hands and was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Why not? I graduated last week. I told you guys I was coming home to start my new job." I looked between them, feeling increasingly uneasy. Something was off about their reactions. Sophie had even put down her phone and was watching the scene unfold with an odd expression. "Carol," Dad cut in suddenly, standing up. "Can we talk in the office for a minute?" I followed him into Mom's old office, my office now, technically. The room still had Mom's degrees on the wall, her collection of financial reference books on the shelves. He closed the door behind us, and I noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he turned to face me. "Listen, honey," he started, his voice low. "There's something you need to know. Linda, well, she thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" "I told her it was my house," he continued, not meeting my eyes. "That I gave it to your mother and you out of kindness after the divorce, and that after your mom passed, it reverted to me. She thinks you've just been living here because I allowed it." I must have stood there gaping at Dad for a full minute before finding my voice again. My first instinct was to storm out of the office and tell Linda everything. Now I understood her surprised look when I showed up. In her mind, I was just some freeloader trying to crash in their house. I have to tell her the truth, I said, moving toward the door, but Dad caught my arm. Please, Carol, he begged, his voice barely above a whisper. Just give me a little time. I'll find us a new place to live, I promise. I just need to figure out how to tell her without destroying our marriage. Destroying your marriage? I hissed. What about what you're doing to me? He pulled a set of keys from his pocket, holding them out like a peace offering. These are for the new locks. Please, sweetheart. Just a few weeks, that's all I'm asking. Let me handle this my way. I took the keys, feeling sick to my stomach. Fine, I said finally. But this is insane, Dad. You know that, right? He nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you, honey. I'll make this right, I promise. But things started going downhill immediately. At dinner that night, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Linda kept shooting me these looks across the table, all her previous warmth gone. The woman who used to bake my favorite cookies and invite me to book club now acted like I was a stranger who'd wandered in off the street. More potatoes, Dad? Sophie asked, completely oblivious to the tension. Would anyone mind if I redecorated the living room? Linda asked suddenly, not looking at me. The current setup is a bit dated. I gripped my fork tighter, knowing she was talking about Mom's furniture arrangement. Dad coughed awkwardly and changed the subject. The next morning, I was making coffee when Linda cornered me in the kitchen. She was still in her robe, hair uncombed, but her eyes were sharp and focused. Carol, she said, leaning against the counter. I think we need to talk about your plans. My plans? Yes. When are you planning to look for your own place? She asked it casually, like she was asking about the weather. Now that you have a job lined up, you should start thinking about moving out. You're a grown woman now, after all. I took a slow sip of coffee, counting to 10 in my head. Actually, I've talked to Dad about staying here for now. He's fine with it. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she just turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and a growing sense of dread about how this was all going to play out. The next 2 weeks were like living in a hostile environment. Linda's attitude shifted from cold to downright passive-aggressive. She'd accidentally wash my clothes with colors that would bleed, claiming she forgot which laundry basket was mine. She'd cook family dinners, but conveniently make just enough for 3 people, acting surprised when I came to the table. When I tried to watch TV in the living room, she'd suddenly need to vacuum right there. If I was using the kitchen to make breakfast, she'd barge in and start reorganizing the cabinets, muttering about how some people never learned to keep things tidy. She even moved my mother's favorite vase from its spot on the mantel to some corner shelf, claiming it didn't match her new decorating vision. The worst part was watching Sophie follow her mother's lead. My half-sister, who just weeks ago had been sending me memes and calling me for advice about boys, now rolled her eyes whenever I entered a room. She started calling me that girl when talking about me to her friends on the phone, loud enough for me to hear. Despite the tension at home, my professional life was taking off. I visited Marshall and Brooks Financial, where they showed me my future workspace, a nice corner desk with a view of downtown. My future colleagues seemed friendly and welcoming, especially Sarah from the risk assessment team, who offered to take me to lunch. When do you start? She asked over sandwiches. 2 weeks, I replied. Just enough time to settle in at home. That evening at dinner, I shared my start date with the family, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. They showed me my office today. I start in 2 weeks. Linda's fork clinked against her plate as she set it down with exaggerated care. Well, isn't that wonderful? Once you get your first paycheck, you can start looking for your own apartment. I know of some nice complexes across town, very affordable for young professionals. I caught Dad's pleading look across the table. His eyes seemed to beg me to keep quiet, to maintain his lie just a little longer. I stabbed at my peas and said nothing. To avoid the tension at home, I started reconnecting with old high school friends. Katie and Jessica were still in town, and we'd meet for coffee or shopping trips, falling back into our old rhythms as if no time had passed. But coming home was always uncomfortable. I'd walk in and hear hushed conversations from the kitchen or living room that would stop abruptly when I appeared. Dad and Linda would spring apart like guilty teenagers, papers would be hastily shoved into drawers, and fake smiles would plaster themselves across their faces. Saturday morning, I woke up to an unusually quiet house. No sound of Linda's weekend meal prep in the kitchen, no Sophie's music blasting from her room, no Dad watching sports on TV. The silence felt wrong somehow, like the calm before a storm. I padded downstairs in my pajamas, checking each room as I went. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but unused since the night before. The living room was empty, the throw pillows perfectly arranged on the couch. Sophie's boots, usually cluttering the entryway, were gone. Even Dad's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone, no messages, no notes about where everyone had gone. My first thought was that maybe they'd gone out for breakfast, but something felt off. They never went out for breakfast without at least leaving a note. Even during these tense weeks, they'd maintained that basic courtesy. I tried calling Dad first, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Weird. I tried a few more times with the same result, that automated voice telling me the person I was trying to reach was unavailable. A knot started forming in my stomach. Finally, I called Linda. She picked up on the fourth ring, just as I was about to hang up. "What do you want?" Her voice was sharp, hostile in a way I'd never heard before. In the background, I could hear waves and what sounded like tropical music. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I said, caught off guard by her tone. I woke up and the house was empty. She laughed, an ugly, mean sound that made my stomach clench. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. First-class flights, luxury resort, the works. We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you too. Not that you'd know anything about paying for things yourself." "What? I wouldn't." "Save it," she cut me off. "I'm sick of this whole situation. You're nothing but a lazy freeloader, living in our house like you own the place. Your father might put up with it, but I'm done. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman living in our house, eating our food, using our utilities?" My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my mother's chairs, actually, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me up. "Linda, No, you listen to me," she snarled. "Your father never loved you, you were just an obligation. He already wasted enough money on your college education, and now you're squatting in our house like some entitled princess. Well, I've had enough. Did you think you could just live here forever? Mooching off us while we work hard to maintain this home?" I could hear Sophie giggling in the background, and Dad's muffled voice saying something I couldn't make out. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. "When we get back," she continued, her voice dripping with venom, "I want you gone. Do you understand me? Pack your things and get out of our house. If you're still there when we return, I'll throw you out myself. And trust me, I won't be gentle about it. I don't care where you go, live on the street for all I care. You're not our problem anymore. And don't bother trying to call your father. He agrees with me, he's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Carol, or don't." I really couldn't care less. The line went dead. I sat in that kitchen for what felt like hours, fury slowly replacing shock. They were living in my house, the house my mother had worked for, had left to me, and they had the nerve to call me a freeloader? To try to throw me out? Well, I'd had enough of playing along with Dad's lies. I blocked their numbers on my phone, my hands still shaking, but now with anger rather than hurt. Then I started methodically going through the house, gathering their belongings. Linda's expensive clothes, Sophie's school stuff, Dad's golf clubs, everything went into boxes and suitcases. I worked through the entire Saturday, fueled by rage and bitter disappointment. By Sunday morning, I had their life packed up and stacked in the garage. I found a 24-hour locksmith who could come right away. He worked quickly, replacing the locks on all the doors. It cost a small fortune, but it was worth every penny. When he finished, I handed him my credit card, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I clutched the new keys. Monday morning, I started my new job at Marshall & Brooks. For 2 weeks, I threw myself into work, learning the ropes, making new friends, trying not to think about the confrontation I knew was coming. I kept their stuff in the garage, but I rearranged the house back to how Mom had it, removing every trace of Linda's decorating vision. Then came that Friday. I pulled into the driveway after work to find them standing there, Dad looking nervous, Linda red-faced with fury, and Sophie hanging back with a scowl. They must have just gotten back from their vacation. Their suitcases were still in their rental car. Linda started screaming before I even got out of my car. "How dare you change our locks? How dare you lock us out of our own house?" I walked calmly past them to unlock the door. Linda followed, still yelling. "We're calling the police. This is breaking and entering. This is our house." I turned to face them, something inside me finally snapping. "No, Linda, it's not your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother bought it before she even met Dad. She left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it, temporarily." Linda laughed, but it was an uncertain sound. She looked at Dad. "Tell her she's lying. Tell her this is our house." Dad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. He just shrugged, his shoulders slumping. "She's telling the truth. The house, it was always hers." I watched as the truth sank in, as Linda's face transformed from rage to calculation in a matter of seconds. Her entire demeanor changed, like a switch had been flipped. "Oh, Carol, sweetheart," she said, forcing a laugh. "You didn't think I was serious on the phone, did you? I was just joking. You know how I can get sometimes. All that sun and those tropical cocktails went to my head." "Stop it," I said quietly, but she kept going. "We're family. Remember all those nice times we had? The book club meetings, the holiday dinners? We can have that again." She took a step toward me, arms outstretched like she was going to hug me. Dad jumped in then, his voice thick with emotion. "Princess, I'm so sorry. I know I handled this all wrong, but I love you. You're my daughter. Please, can't we work this out?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The father who left when I was 9. Who paid for my education but missed my life. Who lied about my house, my inheritance, my mother's legacy. Work what out, Dad? The fact that you lied to your wife about owning my house? Or the fact that you stood by while she planned to throw me out of it? Linda turned back to me with that fake smile. "Carol, let's be reasonable. We can all live here together. We'll pay rent." "No," I said firmly. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." That's when Linda's mask cracked again. "You ungrateful little bitch. After everything we've done for you, you'd throw your own family out on the street?" I felt oddly calm as I replied, "You just spent what, $10,000 on a luxury vacation you deliberately hid from me? Pretty sure you can afford an apartment." "Carol, please," Dad tried again, reaching for my arm. "I know I messed up, but..." "No," I cut him off. "You didn't mess up, you lied. 4 years. You let your wife believe she owned my mother's house. You watched her try to redecorate it, rearrange it, erase every trace of Mom. And when she planned to throw me out, you said nothing." "I was going to tell her the truth," he protested. "When? After I was gone? After she'd finished making my house her home?" I shook my head. "I'm done. Get your things and get out." I walked inside and closed the door, ignoring Linda's screams about ingratitude and cruelty. Through the window, I watched them loading boxes from the garage into their rental car. Linda was still yelling, her face red with fury. Sophie was crying. Dad just looked defeated. It took them 3 trips to get everything. As they loaded the last box, Dad tried one more time, knocking on the door. I didn't open it. They finally left as the sun was setting. The next day, Dad tried calling from a new number. Carol, please, he begged. We can fix this. No, Dad, we can't, I said. Linda made it very clear how you all really feel about me. A freeloader? An obligation? Someone you never loved? Maybe those were her words, but your silence said enough. That was 2 months ago. I still live in Mom's house, my house. I've repainted the walls, planted new roses in the garden, made it mine again. Sometimes I think about them, wonder where they ended up. But mostly, I think about Mom, and how she made sure I'd always have a home, no matter what. Dad still tries to call sometimes, from different numbers. I don't pick up anymore. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ashes. The funny thing is, I'm happier now. My job is going well, I've made new friends at work, and for the first time since Mom died, I feel at peace in this house. Sometimes healing means letting go, of people, of lies, of the fairy tale of family you wanted to believe in.
Dahlia, have you ever heard of HSP? I'm one, you know. These words were often repeated by my sister-in-law Brielle, my husband's sister. HSP refers to someone who is highly sensitive to stimuli and easily affected by others' moods. A delicate personality. I, a bearer of such a sensitive soul, was once told, for the final farewell, it's family only. So could you, a stranger, please leave? Oh, why don't you guard the parking lot outside? Maybe count the blades of grass during the funeral? On the day of the final goodbye to my father-in-law Ezekiel, I was told this under the cold sky. When my kind husband Axel learned of this, he uttered something astonishing, too late for regrets for those who caused alarm. After all, I had been cared for by these people in the worst way possible. Amidst the tense atmosphere, one of the attendees said, "Aren't you guys going to stop Dahlia outside?" Me? Outside, engaged in a rather surprising activity. I'm Dahlia, a 30-year-old office worker who met Axel through a friend. We dated for 3 years and got married just a year ago. I wish I could say it's been a tranquil married life, but not quite. I've been harboring a certain worry since the beginning of the marriage. We often gather at my in-laws' house for seasonal events. Naturally, there's a lot to do, like serving coffee when guests arrive. Glancing at my mother-in-law, Vivian, she seems busy chatting with relatives. It's not exactly painful, but it's not easy using a kitchen in a stranger's house where I don't usually live. Belle, could you help me out a bit? I'm not quite sure about the kitchen details. I asked Brielle, who had escaped to the kitchen and was sitting on a chair fiddling with her mobile phone. Dahlia, I've said this many times, but I am an HSP, so please don't ask me for favors. It makes me sad and hurts me. Brielle replied before storming off to her room, making a loud noise. Ah, I did it again. My relationship with Brielle was always like this, unable to have a proper conversation without supposedly hurting her with my words. After high school, Brielle couldn't hold down a job for long due to her personality, hopping from one job to another. By the way, she quit another job a few months ago and is currently unemployed. Dahlia, what happened? There was a loud noise. Axel was the first to rush over in such times. I had another issue with Belle. Sorry, I apologized with a wry smile. Brielle's just being selfish. I'm really sorry for making you feel bad. Axel always stood by my side. Then Vivian came from the living room. Dahlia again, you know Brielle is sensitive. I always tell you to be careful. Seriously, for Brielle to get that angry. It must have been something big, right? Don't bully her too much, please. Vivian glared at me angrily. Whenever Vivian's loud voice was heard, Brielle would come out of her room. Mom, it's okay, it's my fault. Dahlia asked me to make coffee and told me to take a lead since I am unemployed. And it just made me feel so frustrated. Dahlia, I'm sorry for making a loud noise earlier, she apologized tearfully. To an outsider, I was the complete villain. I didn't say anything like that, Brielle. Why do you always lie? I just asked you to help me with the kitchen details, I said. I'm sorry for always misunderstanding. I'm HSP, so please don't raise your voice. She pretended to tremble and act scared like a tragic heroine. I hated it because it was so infuriating. The relatives made awkward faces and the atmosphere turned terrible. The one who always managed to change the tense mood was my father-in-law, Ezekiel. Dahlia, you tried to make coffee. Thank you. Come on, Vivian and Brio apologized to Dahlia. Brio, you're an adult now, not a child anymore. He firmly reprimanded his daughter. Because of that, the relatives chimed in, That's right, Bri, you're an adult now. Maybe it's time to look for a partner or start job hunting. You can't rely on your parents forever. Learn a bit from your brother Axel. Hearing this, Brio's face turned red. Visits to the in-laws' house always left me exhausted. Sitting on the sofa at home, I let out a big sigh. Seeing me like that, Axel, as always, said, Dahlia, my family, I'm really sorry. Belle has always been a pain. Can't keep a job. I tell them not to coddle her, but Mom is like that, you know. It's a headache for me too. We don't have to go to my parents' house anymore. But being a newlywed, if I'm the only one not going, Axel might be criticized. Hesitating to accept his suggestion, I thought about it. After all, those gatherings were only once a month, if at all, and I just needed to endure for a few hours. Besides, I thought I understood a bit about this HSP character trait Belle talked about. I have a best friend named Maya. We were high school classmates and moved from Dallas to Boston together. Of course, I asked her to give a speech at my wedding. Maya too has a fiancé she's been with for a long time, about to get married. He's serious, responsible, and kind. We're both busy with work and haven't seen each other recently, but she's my precious friend. I didn't know much about HSP until Belle mentioned it, but the more I looked into it, it's just like Maya, I thought. I wasn't sure if I could act as Belle wanted, but I tried to understand her personality. Amid these days, my husband and I were called to the in-laws' house. Ezekiel wasn't there, only Vivian and Brio. Vivian opened her mouth and blurted out something unbelievable to me. Dahlia, can you stop it already? Filled with question marks, I replied, and what is that? Vivian, face red with anger, said, Don't play dumb, Dahlia. You've been sending harassing messages to Brio almost daily. She's scared, poor thing. What? I was baffled, having no clue about such accusations. Then Axel intervened. So where's the proof? If you're going that far, show us those messages. With Axel's words, Belle shivered a little. I was too scared and deleted them, but I'm not lying. Thinking that there are people like Dahlia in the world makes me too scared to even think about getting a job. I was infuriated by her weak, crying figure. Despite being an adult, Belle had a hard time at work and quit her previous job, right? She started feeling better recently, so I suggested she start looking for a job again. Then she cried and said all that. Yesterday I felt so sorry for her. No way. That's just too far-fetched. And Vivian, believing that they're both ridiculous. Disgusted, I looked at the two of them. So that's all you called us for? Consider our position, being dragged into such a stupid conversation. Brio, what's with you always using HSP as an excuse? You've been to a hospital or something for it, right? Axel glared at Brio. Huh. Of course I'm taking medication, and it's really hard for me. I can't work in this state, Brio yelled, slamming the table with a loud noise. Vivian echoed her, Yes, Axel, you're being deceived by Dahlia. Brio is suffering so much. Why aren't you on her side? You're crazy. Axel looked at them as if they were filth. What are you talking about? You two are the ones who are crazy. Then Axel retorted, Brio, please stop using me as an excuse for not wanting to work. It's extremely unpleasant. Brio's face turned red. For the next few months, I experienced what seemed like a peaceful married life for the first time. I learned how important it is to distance oneself from the source of the stress. It was a cold early morning when it happened unexpectedly. At 4:00 a.m. Axel's mobile phone rang. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, he said, Oh, it's Mom. Obviously, I can ignore it, right? As Axel was about to go back to sleep, I said, Calling this early in the morning is a bit strange, don't you think? Maybe something's happened. Reluctantly answering the call, he heard, Axel, Ezekiel has. It was a heart attack. By the time we rushed to the hospital, Ezekiel was already gone. Vivian, seeing me, said, "Why did you come too? Go away," and she threw her bag at me. Belle was also there. "It's all Dahlia's fault. All of it." Non-family members leave. I said to their irrational words, "Enough. Can't you be quiet at a time like this? It's so unfair to Ezekiel. And don't worry, I don't consider you family either." Axel apologized to me, but there was so much to do. Ignoring the unreliable two, we busied ourselves with death notices, funeral, and church arrangements. Ezekiel's sister, auntie-in-law Lucy, who lived far away, said, "He worked so hard. Rest well, Ezekiel." "So what will you do, Axel?" Axel, looking straight ahead, replied, "My mind's been made up for a long time." Lucy simply nodded in understanding. We decided to have a funeral with only close family. On the day of the funeral, I never expected to be treated like that. While I was bustling around, Vivian and Brio called me over. "What is it?" I asked. They had a request. We asked Axel, but he refused. "Can you ask him for us?" I was shocked when I heard what they wanted. "Now that Ezekiel's gone, you both work, right? Could you help us out financially? Maybe $1,500 a month would be good. We're family after all, right?" They were completely ridiculous. I couldn't help but laugh, holding my stomach. "Family, huh? Please don't make me laugh. Weren't you the ones who said non-family members should leave, always calling us outsiders? And now saying we're family when you're in trouble? Isn't that too self-centered?" I refuse, of course. "You're both young. Please work." Laughing derisively at me, Brielle used her large frame to forcefully push my shoulder and said, "Fine then, we want a family-only farewell. So could you, an outsider, please leave? Go guard the parking lot outside, and while you're at it, count the blades of grass during the funeral." Pulling my arm and laughing as if it was amusing, she kicked me out of the funeral home without even giving me a coat in the cold season. "Brielle, doesn't it hurt your heart to do such a petty thing? Don't you realize that your whims hurt people?" My words seemed to have no effect. What? Preaching to me, a younger person? Heart-hurting. I've never felt that. Rather, I get irritated watching people who don't do as I want. "Dahlia, your happy work-life boasting is annoying." As she glared at me, I replied, "Well, that's enough. I wish you both the best in difficult times ahead." Smiling kindly, I walked towards the parking lot. I heard their crude laughter behind me, but it didn't bother me anymore. About 20 minutes later, a pale-faced Vivian and Brio, along with an enraged Axel, showed up in the parking lot where I was. "Dahlia, what are you doing? Are you crazy?" Their faces, losing their minds, were comically absurd, and I couldn't help but laugh. "What am I doing?" "Just doing as I was told, guarding the parking lot and counting grass blades. I'm at 350 now. Behind me, as I'm an outsider, I'm not allowed in the funeral home. I've been told by Vivian and Brielle to guard the parking lot and count the blades of grass," I said, pointing to a cardboard box nearby on which I'd written these words. "Why are you out here in the cold doing this?" a relative asked worriedly. I silently pointed at the cardboard box. "Axel brought me my coat. I couldn't believe you were actually doing this. This is the last time. I'm really sorry for all the trouble I've caused," he said tearfully. "It's okay," I said. Axel always stood by me. When I returned to the funeral home, several relatives rushed over. "Don't worry about this and go to your mother's side with peace of mind." "Why would I?" I looked puzzled, and Axel quickly nodded behind me. I later learned that when Axel noticed I was missing, he asked Vivian and the others, "Where's Dahlia?" They replied with a nasty laugh. Dahlia said she's an outsider and wouldn't attend the funeral, so she went outside. She's guarding the parking lot since she has nothing better to do. She's terrible, right? Maybe you should break up with her. Then you can come back home, Axel, and give Mom some peace. Who'd believe such a lie? Axel, outraged, declared, "Comfort you? Are you kidding me? I've said it before, my family is Dahlia and Dahlia alone. I don't want anything to do with people who only hurt her. I'm cutting ties with you." At the mention of cutting ties, Vivian was agitated. "Cutting ties? Such unfilial behavior. At least support us financially. You expect us to live in that house, just the two of us? Show some filial piety." In response to Vivian's furious words, Axel said calmly, "Why do you even think you can continue living in that house? It's too presumptuous. It's embarrassing, right, Lucy?" Lucy nodded to Axel's comment. The in-laws' house was originally built by step-grandparents. When they passed away, The property and the house were inherited by Lucy after a discussion among siblings. Vivian, you didn't help Dad and Mom when they were in trouble, did you? Instead, you drove them out of their own home. I've always apologized on behalf of Ezekiel, and I inherited the house. There's no plan for me to return. Brielle, you too, you've always bullied my daughter every time you saw her. She's so afraid of you that she didn't even come today. Lucy glared at the two. Dad was planning to divorce Mom and leave the house. You didn't know that, did you? He consulted me many times, saying he was scared of you too and didn't know what to do. Lucy and I were preparing to sell the house. Axel spoke calmly. Divorce? Selling the house? Axel, what are you talking about? The fear of possibly losing their home seemed to instantly drain the color from their faces. Well, you need to straighten out your childlike behavior, or you're going to face serious consequences soon. Axel's advice was unheeded. Shut up. I'm not wrong. Selling the house? What are you thinking? That's it. I'll move into your place. Take care of me and Mom, Vivian demanded. Ignoring their childlike comments, Axel said, You need to leave the house by the end of the month. We've got a potential buyer, and don't think of depending on us. Dahlia's mother has been diagnosed with an illness, and we're moving to Dahlia's hometown. Axel's words were met with loud complaints from the two. Amidst the tense atmosphere, a relative who entered the funeral home said, Aren't you going to stop Dahlia outside? What followed was as earlier. Neither of the two, already disliked by the relatives, had anyone on their side and seemed diminished. Brielle, I've always thought this, but HSP, that's a lie, isn't it? I asked. Brielle glared at me. No, I'm taking medication. Then what's the name of the medication? Which hospital? I pressed her. That is, Brielle fell silent. HSP is an innate personality trait, and there's no medication for it. My best friend is like that. She's been suffering in silence, pushing herself too hard. She's serious and tends to bear it all alone. But you're different. You're not HSP. You're just running away from unpleasant things, ignoring others' feelings, and throwing tantrums like a child whenever something doesn't go your way. What you did to Maya, I will never forgive you for that. Months ago, I met my best friend Maya after a long time. She was even thinner than her already slender frame and told me she was visiting a psychiatrist now. The cause was stress at work. A new employee, upon realizing Maya was younger, behaved overly familiar from the first day, pushing work onto her. It's faster when someone experienced does it, right? Thanks a bunch, the new employee had said. Maya ended up with constant overtime. Eventually, the new employee slammed the desk and announced, This document is due tomorrow, right? It needs to be submitted today. This and this are incorrect. I'm going home, and I quit today. I can't work in a place where seniors bully newcomers. She left all her work and really went home. Maya, feeling responsible, soon took a leave from the company. Her engagement ended due to misunderstandings with her fiancé. Was it my fault? I was scared and didn't know what to say, Maya had said. I comforted her as she cried silently. Just hearing her story made me despise that person. Just hearing about it makes me hate that person. Why not sue? It's unfair that only we suffer. Do you have any evidence? Maya had recorded their conversations to review them later, suspecting her own communication might have been faulty. I was infuriated by the arrogant attitude, but more than that, I felt dizzy when I found out that the unreasonable person was Bella. Upon learning this, Maya said, I can't see someone from Dahlia's family. Don't worry, we're practically strangers now. I'll fight with you, I said. My cheerful laugh brought a slight smile to Maya's face. So expect a letter from a lawyer about the compensation claim soon. Make sure you pay up, I smiled kindly, and Brielle's face went pale. The funeral proceeded solemnly, and I was able to say my final goodbye to Ezekiel. Vivian was too distraught to give the eulogy, so Axel did it instead. There were sniffles around the room as he spoke of his father. We moved to Dallas, and Mom's health is improving. Vivian and Brielle, kicked out of their house, managed to rent a cheap apartment with little cash left, and now the compensation to Maya. Their life is tough. Vivian started a part-time job. Brielle, you quit your job again. Be responsible. Shut up. I'm not wrong. Parents should support their child once close. They now constantly argue, and it seems they might be evicted from the apartment. I have issued a restraining order against them and instructed Mom to call the police without hesitation if they show up at our place. Maya quit her job and returned to Dallas with us. She's still recovering but gradually gaining weight, and her smile is coming back. Nothing makes me happier. Someday when I have children, I want to teach them the importance of empathy and that there's no need to endure and be friends with someone they can't understand. My name is Nicholas Anderson. I'm 21 years old. After graduating from college, I moved away from my hometown and started living alone. My job keeps me pretty busy, and I didn't really have any reason to go back home. However, one day I got assigned to a 2-day business trip. Coincidentally, the destination was near my parents' house, so I decided to drop by and visit. That's when I reunited with Sandra, my father's stepdaughter from his remarriage. At that time, I never imagined that this reunion would become an event that would change my life. Nicholas, I have an urgent request. Can you handle this business trip? My boss asked, and I felt a sudden pressure. A new environment and dealing with problems on my own made the trip a nerve-wracking prospect for me. The destination is near your parents' place, so I thought it might be convenient for you, he added. Hearing it was close to my parents' house eased my tension a bit as it reminded me of the home I hadn't visited in a long time. Get ready as soon as you can. We're counting on you. My boss's comments restored some of my confidence, and I solidified my resolve for the trip. At the same time, I decided to contact my parents. My mother passed away before I started elementary school. My father wasn't adept at juggling work, childcare, and household chores, so I often stayed at my grandmother's house. Life changed when my father decided to remarry. Your new mom is bringing a daughter who is 5 years older than you. Is that okay? He told me, mixing anticipation with anxiety about who was coming. On the day we first met, his new wife was a gentle person, and my worries about a new family quickly faded. Her daughter's name was Sandra. Sandra was a quiet girl with clear, beautiful eyes. We spent our days together as a family, and our bond as siblings grew stronger. However, as we reached adolescence, spending time with an opposite-sex sibling became awkward, and we naturally started spending less time together. What kept things from getting awkward between us was probably our shared hobby and the presence of Max. Max was our family dog. The times I spent walking and playing in the yard with Max and Sandra were just everyday moments, but looking back now, they were happy times. Even now, the doghouse still remains in our yard, even though Max is gone. On the first day of my business trip, after finishing my work, I nervously headed toward the town filled with nostalgic sights. Seeing the old doghouse in the yard brought a smile to my face. When I opened the front door, my father and stepmother greeted me with familiar smiles that wrapped me in warmth. However, that wasn't all. Sandra was there too, with her long hair gently swaying in the breeze coming through the door. She welcomed me with a graceful smile. Even after all these years, her beauty remained unchanged. Hi, Nicholas. Good to see you. How was your work today? She said with a gentle and comforting voice that reached my ears. The tension within me began to dissolve in the comfort of being with my family. That night, we all gathered for dinner, spending time together as a family of 4 after so long. The next day, after finishing my work, I decided to go to the park for a change of pace. As I walked around, I couldn't help but glance at familiar places that held many memories. Entering the park where I used to play, I noticed a couple holding hands approaching from the opposite direction. I saw someone that made me stop in my tracks. Hey Nicholas, it's you. You finished work. Sandra greeted me with the same kind smile as the previous day and introduced the man beside her as her boyfriend. This is Larry, we're dating. Sandra, who is this? Larry asked. He is Nicholas, my stepbrother. He's back home for work. I see, Larry said, extending his hand confidently for a handshake. Feeling a bit awkward, I shook his hand. Sandra's happy expression and Larry's confident demeanor made me feel out of place. Out of habit, I exchanged business cards with Larry and quickly left the scene. On Sunday, my day off, I was still wrapped in my blanket in my old room at my parents' house when Sandra woke me up abruptly. Sandra, why are you here? Seeing her nearly panicking, even more than my groggy self, somehow made me calm down. I slowly sat up in bed and took a deep breath. What's up? What happened? She sat on the bed beside me and opened her mouth with a worried expression. I've been assigned by the principal to explain things to new parents at the preschool. But I'm not confident. I don't know how to get the message across. Sandra is a teacher at the nearby preschool. Because she's dedicated and proud of her work, she's probably feeling the pressure. You'll be fine. You've been a teacher for years now. You're a pro, so explaining things to beginners should be easy, I said, trying to be playful. It seemed to work as her expression softened a bit. First, try to put yourself in their shoes, and then speak with confidence. I explained the presentation skills I developed as a business person to her. I wasn't sure how helpful it would be, but I could see her expression gradually brightening. By the time I finished explaining, my stomach started growling, and Sandra noticed. Let me make you something, or maybe Mom's already made something. Give me one moment, she said as she hurried to the kitchen. Honestly, seeing the usually confident and graceful Sandra in that state made her seem quite endearing. Mom's made breakfast, so let's go out for lunch. Do you know any good places? She asked. A new restaurant opened up a short walk from here. I heard from the moms at the preschool that it's really good because it is kid-friendly. I was surprised she talked about such things, but it made sense given her dedication and the trust she earned from the parents. The fact that she was chosen to handle this orientation was a testament to her character. The restaurant Sandra took me to had a warm wooden interior, a play area for kids, and a menu with a wide variety of dishes. What should I get? Sandra pondered the menu with delight. I noticed someone who looked like Larry through the window. It wasn't odd to see him on a Sunday, but it felt off seeing him alone in such a restaurant. Feeling a bit uneasy, I turned back to Sandra. This looks good. What are you getting? I'll have the pasta. I'll go with a hamburger. By the time our meals arrived, I'd forgotten all about seeing Larry. That night, Sandra and I sat in a corner of the yard reminiscing under the starry sky. Time had flown by as I helped her practice her explanation. We used to play a lot in this yard, didn't we? Right. You and Max used to roll around like a ball. I miss him, I sighed deeply. That was probably the happiest time of my life. I agree with you. Those were happy times. But you know, these moments now are important too. Our conversation paused, and a quiet night spread across the yard. Suddenly, Sandra's arm reached out and touched my hair. Hey, your hair really is just like Max's, isn't it? I always wondered why you kept patting my head when we were kids. Was it because it reminded you of him? Oh, you caught me, she said with a mischievous smile. Her playful side made my heart feel light. That night, I decided to drive Sandra back to her apartment. Her apartment had a quiet, peaceful atmosphere with a small houseplant by the entrance. Thanks for driving me home. You should come over sometime. Sure, another time. Good luck with the orientation. I'll try just the way you taught me, she replied, her smile filled with gratitude, making me feel a bit bashful. However, what happened next was a shock. My business trip was at its midpoint. Even though I hadn't made plans with Sandra for the day, I was curious about how her orientation went and whether it was a success. I decided to invite her to dinner. There was no response when I rang the doorbell. Thinking it might be broken, I knocked on the door but still got no reply. When I turned the doorknob, it opened without resistance. Fearing there might be a burglar or intruder, I clenched my fists and entered her apartment. The place was furnished simply and neatly organized. I quickly found Sandra sitting in a corner of the room, her eyes filled with tears and her cheeks streaked with tear tracks. Trying to calm my racing heart, I walked over to her and spoke softly. Hey, are you okay? What happened? She just shook her head silently, not saying a word. Not knowing what else to do, I sat down next to her. I could see her react slightly. After a while, she slowly began to speak. It was all a lie. The despair in her voice weighed heavily on my heart. What do you mean by a lie? I asked, and she wiped her tears with her sleeve. She had a pained expression on her face. At today's orientation, Larry showed up. He brought his wife and kids. His name, his job, everything was a lie. I can't believe it. It was all fabricated. Tears started to well up in her eyes again. In that moment, I felt something inside me break, like everything just popped. She continued, her voice trembling. Nicholas, please, just once. Finally looking at me, she roughly wiped her flowing tears with her sleeve. Just once more, I want to walk Max's old path with you. She couldn't sleep or stay cooped up in her room in this state. If reminiscing about our childhood could ease her mind, I was ready to go. We walked down the path lined with streetlights, the path we used to walk with our beloved dog. It had fewer vacant lots now. Back then, Sandra matched her pace to mine, but now I was matching mine to hers. This path felt so much longer when we were kids, but it's actually quite short. Her eyes were red from crying, but her voice was gaining strength. Max loved you so much. He was really attached to you. He seemed to like Mom too. He was just a ladies' man. Sandra let out a small laugh. That smile left a gentle warmth in my heart. This feels so nostalgic, she said, reaching out to me. Your hair really does feel just like Max's. It's comforting. Just this once, okay? Sure, I replied. Her touch was delicate, conveying both kindness and sadness. Each time her fingers traced through my hair, something deep inside me began to warm up. I felt my feelings for her growing stronger. I love you, Sandra, I whispered silently in my heart. Memories of the past and her smiling face kept flooding my mind. I realized I was in love with her. It wasn't long after that Larry began stalking Sandra. He showed up at the preschool after work, inviting her out to dinner. She refused, but Larry insisted he had to apologize, and she reluctantly agreed. At dinner, he said, I'm going to leave my wife. I want to be happy with you. Please marry me. His selfish words were unbelievable. I could no longer believe the words of such a man, but Sandra's heart was swayed. She came to consult me, aware of the circumstances. Hearing her story made my blood boil. I pulled out the business card Larry had given me and slammed it on the table. How many lies are written on this card? Can you really trust a man like that when he says he's going to leave his wife? Nicholas, he's a liar who prepared all this for his own selfish reasons. He has a wife and kids, yet he approaches you. That's the truth about him. Sandra's eyes filled with both frustration and determination. I could see she was resolute. Even if Larry lost his temper, I wasn't entirely without confidence. I was ready to confront him to protect Sandra. Thank you, Nicholas. I won't believe him anymore. This ends here. Her hand trembled slightly, but there was new hope in her eyes. Deciding to cut ties with Larry brought a sense of relief to my heart. Nevertheless, Larry persisted in stalking Sandra. He started waiting outside her apartment instead of the preschool. When Sandra firmly rejected him, he only smirked. His harassment continued, and when Sandra came to me for help again, she had dark circles under her eyes. This morning, a potted plant was broken by the front door. I had to clean it up. There's no proof it was Larry, but I understand. I'll come with you tonight. As we approached her apartment, Sandra looked increasingly anxious. In the dim light, I could see Larry waiting by the entrance. He stepped in front of me as I walked up to him. Aren't you married with kids? Stop approaching my sister. Larry scoffed with a cold smile and started moving towards Sandra. I pulled her behind me to protect her. If you hurt her anymore, I won't forgive you. Won't forgive me? What are you going to do about it? Larry picked up a child's bat that was lying by the entrance and swung it without hesitation. The sound of the bat striking the concrete echoed loudly. As he raised the bat, his figure was illuminated by the moonlight, his eyes filled with madness, sending chills down my spine. He swung the bat at me. I reacted instantly, using a karate block to catch the bat. The impact sent a dull ache through my right arm. Despite the pain, I didn't take my eyes off him. Holding the bat with my right arm, I struck him with my other hand. He groaned and collapsed to the ground, the bat rolling away. I took a deep breath and kept a close watch on him. He staggered to his feet and walked away from us. As his shadow faded into the distance, the pain and numbness in my arm became more apparent. Once I saw Sandra's relieved smile, I could stand it. The sound of sirens approached, likely called by a neighbor. As I stood there in a daze, Sandra hugged me. A doctor examined me, and fortunately, no broken bones were found in my arm. Still, the bruises and the vivid purple of my skin were hard to miss. Our parents came to pick us up, and both Sandra and I decided to stay at their house. On the way home and after we arrived, Sandra kept thanking and apologizing to me repeatedly. It wasn't until around midnight that we could talk normally. You still remember your karate moves? Yeah, I guess so. Sandra continued nostalgically. Do you remember the camp we went to during the training camp? Of course. That was when you mistook the coach for a ghost or something. You knocked him out with your karate move, right? I'll never forget that. That's something you should forget. She puffed out her cheeks in a slightly shy demeanor. She looked like a child. Do you remember inviting me to do something at the camp? What is it? I tilted my head in confusion. Oh man, don't remember. Maybe I'll remember if you tell me. That's not remembering. Okay, give me a hint. A hint? Let's see. Under the beautiful starry sky, we did something together. I started to recall something. Was it the time capsule? Bingo! Sandra snapped her fingers in delight. Although I didn't remember it clearly, seeing her so happy made me realize it was an important memory for her. So Sandra, how about we go to the campsite next Sunday? On the day we arrived at the campsite, a gentle breeze made the place feel pleasant. As we dug up the time capsule, memories from the past flooded back, filling me with nostalgia. I think it was around here, Sandra said, thrusting the shovel into the ground. As we dug, an old faded capsule emerged. She eagerly picked it up and began checking its contents. Inside was an old letter I had written as a child. I want to live in a big house with Sandra and have lots of dogs. Sandra's letter was in there too. Today's camp was so much fun. I'm so happy that Nicholas invited me to do the time capsule. Let's stay close forever. I want to spend more happy times with him. We sat at the campsite under a sky full of twinkling stars. Sandra's smile outshone them all. Sandra, I need to tell you something. My heart was pounding in my chest. I really like you. Sandra's eyes widened in surprise as she stared at me. The silence that followed made the night even more still. Even though we're technically siblings, I want to build a future with you. Gradually, her eyes filled with joy and she smiled like a blooming flower. Nicholas, me too. I've always cared deeply about you too. I hugged her tightly. I hope we can walk this path together. Any future with you will be wonderful. With determination in our hearts, we took our first step towards a new chapter. Everything fell into place after that. Nervously, we told our parents and my father said, "If you both are serious, we support you. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters." Sandra thrived as a preschool teacher surrounded by children, and I found success in my career. We achieved our dream of having dogs after we got married, filling our home with smiles. The dreams in our time capsule became our reality. With Sandra's recent childbirth, we now enjoy happy days with our 2 children. My current dream is for our whole family to continue being happy together.